The Battle of the Palace of Justice and the Persecution of an Innocent Man by Narco-Terrorism. On November 6, 1985, a day when the Constitutional Court of the Supreme Court of Justice would rule in favor of the extradition law in Colombia, the terrorist group M-19, founded by former FARC members with financing from the Extraditables, an alliance between the Medellin cartel and the Cali cartel, forces its way into the Palace of Justice in Colombia, shooting and murdering people and taking civilians hostage, in particular the magistrates of the high courts of the judiciary. The objective? Prevent the ruling in favor of the extradition law. M-19 intended to carry out a sensationalistic act called the People's Justice. It would be carried out against judges and members of the executive branch. Their mission? Burn all court records against drug traffickers linked to potential extraditions and achieve a public relations triumph in the media, equivalent to, but on a larger scale than, that obtained in the occupation of the Embassy of the Dominican Republic years before, 1980, where, after negotiations, the terrorists were welcomed into Cuba like heroes in exchange for millions of dollars and freeing those taken hostage. The President of the Republic does not submit to the pressure of the terrorists, and he issues orders as Commander-in-Chief to the armed forces to assure respect for the Constitution and the rule of law. The Colombian Army, assisted by the National Police, carries out an operation with the aim of rescuing the largest number of hostages who were in the hands of the narco-terrorist group M-19 and defeating the perpetrators of such a terrible, brutal act. As commander of a tactical unit, the Cavalry School, Colonel Luis Alfonso Plazas Vega receives the explicit order to advance the main force entering the Plaza of Justice with tanks. The colonel himself and his troops enter and break the resistance of the narco-terrorist group. Colonel Luis Alfonso Plazas Vega was the first tactical unit commander to enter the Palace of Justice. Nevertheless, he was not the commander of the operation or the only official with command responsibilities within it. As commander of a tactical unit, Colonel Luis Alfonso Plazas Vega took part performing strictly combat functions and never had competence or authority over the handling of those rescued. Once rescued, the hostages were removed from the combat zone in the Palace of Justice, and they became the responsibility of the state intelligence agencies, including military intelligence, the National Police, and the Administrative Security Department, DAS, Departamento Administrativo de Seguridad. That was as far as the operational responsibility of Plazas Vegas went. After 2 days of intense crossfire between the troops and the kidnappers, the Colombian army is able to rescue over 260 people, including 40 magistrates who were being held captive by the terrorist group. Tragically and mercilessly, the narco-terrorist group M-19 manages to murder some of their hostages, including civilian administrative staff and also judges who could not be rescued by the troops. The narco-terrorists set fire to the huge National Judicial Archive of the court, where all the case files for the extraditables were held, producing a fire in which the flames took over the building, creating a tragedy of indescribable proportions. At the end of the tragic Holocaust and the devastating outcome of the events, and with over 100 people murdered, a huge controversy ensues, along with questioning about what could have happened to 11 people whose bodies never reached their family members. Since then, these people are considered by the media and claimed as the disappeared of the Palace of Justice. These people were workers in the cafeteria. Humble, innocent, hardworking people who had nothing to do with the cases against the mafia or with the narco-terrorism conflict in Colombia. In 1986, the Supreme Court of Justice created the Special Investigation Tribunal to perform an exhaustive investigation into what happened at the Palace of Justice. This tribunal was made up of 2 principal magistrates, Carlos Upegui Zapata and Jaime Serrano Rueda, with 10 special judges and over 30 auxiliary judges. The tribunal was comprised of colleagues of the murdered judges. This investigative judicial team was extremely concerned to find those responsible for the calamity. The tribunal finds that the Colombian army acted under the mandate of the Constitution and in defense of the rule of law. The tribunal declares the narco-terrorist group M-19 guilty of the tragedy. The participation of Colonel Luis Alfonso Plazas Vega was investigated exhaustively, and the tribunal determined that the colonel completely fulfilled his responsibilities in the operation, and that his actions were all in the line of combat and in abidance with the law. With relation to the presumed disappeared in the Palace of Justice, the Special Investigative Tribunal concluded, Clause 17 of the report of the Tribunal to the Supreme Court of Justice stated, there is sufficient evidence that the disappeared from the cafeteria were taken by their captors, M19, to the fourth floor where they died. Lifeless bodies were found on the fourth floor of the Palace of Justice, to which a number of hostages were taken and where they were murdered by M19. Among these bodies is a group of charred bodies that could not be identified. These lifeless bodies were murdered by M19 on the fourth floor. By their number, the unidentified bodies coincide with the number of bodies that never reached their families, and must be them. The judiciary should insist on performing DNA tests on the unidentified bodies. This procedure could clarify many questions on what happened, and perhaps end the doubts on this case. The unidentified bodies were taken to common graves by legal medicine. For some strange reason, DNA tests have never been performed on these bodies. The Colombian justice system should establish with precision and overwhelming evidence whether what happened was a murder of people by M19, whose burned bodies were never properly examined, or whether what happened was genocide. This mystery has not been clarified with decisive evidence. As soon as this mystery is cleared up, the Colombian state should look for the true intellectual authors and those who carried it out, and apply the full weight of the law. It is not fair that the families of the victims be used to divert the investigations, for that will only contribute to leaving in impunity those truly to blame for the human drama to which they have been subjected. The manipulation of some victims is aimed at condemning an innocent man who fulfilled his constitutional duty in critical moments that threatened the rule of law in Colombia, and who did irreparable damage to the drug trafficking structures in Colombia. On May 16, 1992, after 7 years of investigations, a judge finally finds the members of M19 guilty and orders that they be imprisoned and punished. They were found guilty of the following aggravated crimes: murder, aggravated murder, kidnapping, terrorism, arson, sedition, rebellion, rioting, and document fraud. The remains of the 11 persons were never handed over to their relatives. The relatives of the presumed disappeared have rightly and legitimately sought the truth about what may have happened to their loved ones. In 1990, after a peace process, an amnesty is signed in which the M19 group handed over their weapons in exchange for a pardon of their crimes against humanity and against political power. In 1990, Antonio Navarro Wolf, a member of the M19 High Command, is appointed Minister of Health. The former M19 terrorists gradually reached positions of power, giving shape to a political scene. By now, Antonio Navarro Wolf has been minister, senator, mayor, presidential candidate, and currently department governor. Gustavo Petro has a seat in the Senate of the Republic, but he was also a council member, and now candidate for the presidency of Colombia. Vera Grave, one of the most outstanding M19 guerrilla fighters, was a consul and is currently panelist in international forums. In January 1992, Plazas Vega requests retirement from the Colombian Army. For many people, Colonel Luis Alfonso Plazas Vega was an obstacle within the peace process with the terrorist group. As a civilian, 10 years went by in which Colonel Plazas Vega devoted himself to academic life, university chair, and work as a security consultant. In 2002, Dr. Álvaro Uribe Vélez is elected President of the Republic of Colombia. President Uribe and his Minister of Justice, Fernando Londoño Hoyos, decide to appoint Colonel Luis Alfonso Plazas Vega as National Director of Drugs, DNE.